The Partnership for Strong Communities, for those of you who don't know, is dedicated to ensuring that everyone in Connecticut has a safe, stable home that's affordable to them in an equitable community of their choice. We promote equitable change in Connecticut housing policy by coordinating advocacy, advancing research, and uniting diverse partners. We hold 4 key values which drive our work. We value collaboration, connections, and communication. We actively pursue an anti-racist culture internally and externally. We ground our work in data, qualitative and quantitative. We prioritize long-term solutions, focusing on the full spectrum of housing need and experiences across a continuum. And finally, we engage partners in collective impact to develop consensus legislative agendas and work to engage the civic and political support to drive policy change. And thanks to those of you who are here today from our Home Connecticut campaign, who actively participate in our collective impact process and join us in that work. So as we join here today, the theme of this conference is building stability. And as many of you know, housing stability takes many forms here in Connecticut. It can include paying too much of one's income for housing, living with family or friends to share costs, living in overcrowded or substandard housing, living in unsafe or disinvested neighborhoods, experiencing eviction or a forced move, and at its worst, literal homelessness. BIPOC households disproportionately experience housing instability here in Connecticut too. And for those at the lowest income, below 50% of area median income, or about $50,000 per household annually, but especially those below 30% of area median income, we are short the most affordable units. And as temporary renter protections expire and pandemic resource infusions have waned, more and more Connecticut households, now more than 200,000, face paying more than 30% of their income on housing costs, living in unsafe or unhealthy housing, or experiencing eviction. For every 100 extremely low-income renter households, there are only 42 units available to them, according to recent NLIHC data. And rents continue to rise here in Connecticut, as they do across the nation, up approximately 20% nationally over the past 2 years. And in some places here in Connecticut, rental increases have exceeded that, as I'm sure many of you have heard anecdotally. This is leading to a higher level of evictions and more households struggling. Despite higher wages, the struggle is happening all over Connecticut. It's happening in rural places, urban and suburban. And it is, as it always has, affecting people of all races, but affects people of color here in Connecticut at disproportionate levels. And after more than a decade of successful year-over-year decline in the number of people experiencing homelessness here in Connecticut, we're seeing an increase for the first time in that population. And even with COVID housing aid and additional housing vouchers, our hardworking coordinated access networks and the shelters and other service providers that work with them cannot find units to house people, even when they have housing subsidies to do so. Simply put, we need more housing options here in Connecticut, especially more affordable rental housing. We need newly constructed units, as well as vouchers and the subsidization of existing rental units. And with inflation rising, we're going to need more state and federal resources to simply create the same number of housing opportunities. Connecticut's regulatory and zoning environment continues to pose significant challenges for developers of multifamily housing here in Connecticut, as many of you know. So over the next 3 days, we'll explore how we can build the public and political will to realize equitable, stable, affordable housing in Connecticut. You'll have access to over 24 sessions that will spotlight a wide array of best practices, collaborations, and coordinated advocacy strategies to strengthen housing stability for households and communities here in Connecticut. We have an exciting lineup in store today. In just a minute, you'll hear from our welcome and keynote speakers, followed by a full day of local, state, and national experts talking about everything from building equity through homeownership to the intersection of affordable housing and education. And tomorrow, our plenary session is at 12:30. So please note there, you'll be able to hear from national housing leaders of color as they discuss on-the-ground solutions that can result in more equitable recovery for COVID-19's hardest hit families and stimulate inclusive growth. And we're looking forward to joining many of you for our in-person networking event at the Lyceum tomorrow evening from 4 to 6 p.m. Wednesday, we'll start the day with a plenary session at 9. you'll be able to learn from the expertise of narrative leaders regarding the current public and political climate around housing here and how to continue to shift the conversation to support increasing the number of safe, stable, and affordable rentals here. We'll also hear from the CEO of the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, Nanthanita Trajan, on Wednesday, along with a discussion about our state's qualified allocation plan. And at 1:30 on Wednesday, we're going to host our legislative roundtable as we do each year. And it will feature a mix of lobbyists and legislative leaders from the Connecticut General Assembly. It'll be moderated by Bill Wells of Gallo and Robinson, and the panel will explore topics about bonding, housing development, zoning, post-COVID housing relief, and more. Following that panel, or following that discussion, there will be an audience question and answer period too. One note, scheduling wise, that the 4 o'clock session on Wednesday, which was affordable and fair housing training for planning and zoning officials, is postponed due to speaker availability, unfortunately. We do look forward to hosting that session at a later date, and we'll share that time and date with you as soon as we have it scheduled. Thanks for your patience on that. And we hope you'll explore our full conference agenda and plan out a schedule that most interests you. But note that all sessions will be recorded and made available on our YouTube channel post-conference. So if there's something that you want to rewatch or something that a colleague or friend would be interested in hearing, you can share that with them through those YouTube links after the conference. All right. And none of this would be possible without our generous supporters who make the conference a success each year and allow you to attend for free each of these 3 days. So first, a big thanks to the Connecticut Department of Housing and the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority. And additional leading sponsors include La Rosa Building Group and Melville Charitable Trust, as well as Wells Fargo. We are also grateful to our collaborating sponsors, Bank of America, the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, and Key Bank. And thank you also to collaborating sponsors, Rockport Mortgage and Webster Bank. We also have a host of amazing supporting sponsors that have helped make this conference happen, including 360 Management Group in Glendower, Beacon Communities, Capital for Change, Corporation for Supportive Housing, Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston, Housing Enterprises, LISC, National Equity Fund, Paul Bailey Architect, Point 32 Health Foundation, Trinity Financial, the Housing Collective, and Yukon Health. Thanks again to all our session sponsors, which you'll see here on this slide, who make it possible for us to bring you a total of 24 sessions across these 3 days, again, for free and accessible to anybody. Thank you to all our conference advertisers and supporters. Each of our generous sponsors are featured and linked on our website. Finally, I want to give an extra shout out and thanks to our amazing team at the Partnership for Strong Communities, but especially Deputy Director Chelsea Ross, Advocacy and Education Manager Danielle Hubley, Administrative Director Jane Peters, and our IT Manager Don Branson for all the behind the scenes work over the past several months and all the work they're going to do over the next 3 days to make this conference run. PSC actually runs and manages conference entirely in-house. And it's this group of amazing people that I just mentioned whose hard work makes it all possible. So I want to give them a special thank you today. And if you would like to support the Connecticut Affordable Housing Conference, you can make a donation using the QR code on your screen. We really appreciate your support in keeping this conference free and accessible. So with that, I'm going to move on to introducing our first speaker today. We are so lucky to have Deputy Secretary Todman here with us today. She's the 12th Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and she's dedicated her career to improving people's lives and strengthening communities through housing. She served as the CEO of the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials from 2017 to June 2021. And during her tenure, she improved the association's financial standing and business operations, created a member-centric culture, and advocated for funding and policies to preserve and develop affordable housing and help communities thrive. Before joining NARO, Deputy Secretary Todman served as the Executive Director of the District of Columbia Housing Authority, where she implemented a national award-winning model to house veterans experiencing homelessness, increased home ownership opportunities by 50% for low and moderate income families served by DCHA, increased the number of affordable units available in submarkets experiencing rapid growth, and oversaw 12 concurrent large redevelopment efforts. She prioritized services for youth, workforce development, and commissioned the first citywide needs assessment of public housing residents. Deputy Secretary Todman previously served in several career positions at HUD, so she's no stranger to the department. First as a manager of HUD's $500 million grant competition that focused on the redevelopment of distressed public housing sites, and then as a policy aide in both the Office of Public and Indian Housing and the Office of the Secretary, where she worked with staff across HUD's programs and policy solutions and streamlining implementation. So we're so lucky and grateful that she's able to join us this morning. I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Secretary Todman. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First, let me ask, can you hear me okay? All
Yes.
right, excellent. Always a good place to begin in these times that we are in. And good morning, everyone. Good morning, Connecticut. I will say that I have not had an opportunity to travel to Connecticut yet during my current tenure, but I certainly have been in the state at least once every year, just prior to this job in my previous capacity. So I am so encouraged by the work that you all are doing at the state and local level, and so encouraged by the many housers I've had an opportunity to meet in Connecticut over these many years. I'm thankful to be here to greet you as Deputy Secretary, and bring greetings as well from our fabulous Secretary Fudge, who is an extraordinary leader for this department, the right person at the right time, and happy to be able to link arms with her and continue to do work for the people. You know, as mentioned before, I've spent my entire career just really trying to improve the human condition through housing and community development, from my early days as a staffer on the Hill to working with and learning from communities all across the country, communities just like yours, to really understand how they are strengthening the lives of people and in the communities that we live in. And what I've learned, and I think what you all know, is that this work is a team effort. We know it takes every level of government. It takes the private sector, it takes the nonprofit sector, it takes the people who believe in the power of housing to fight on behalf of all of us to really get the resources that we need. And so it's wonderful to learn more about this organization. It's wonderful to learn about the efforts that you have taken on to galvanize and to propel the state forward. You know, one of the things that's really important to share at the top is, while this administration, the Biden-Harris administration, is doing everything we can to move the housing and community development agenda, I need to take us back for a second from whence we came. I could think it's important to mention this, that it was this administration with many partners at the state and local level. I know what I'll be followed later today by my friend Diane, who was a big advocate in the space. It took this administration billions of dollars to really make sure that we could help families stay in their home. And I think it's important to begin there, because that was a huge achievement that I think sometimes is undervalued in terms of the collective work that we all did to make sure Americans who are impacted by the pandemic, whether they're a renter or a homeowner, were able to stay in their homes during this challenging time. So I'd like to really lift that up and thank any one of you who played a part in that in the state of Connecticut. Thank you. Thank you for that work. But we knew in the Biden administration that just responding to having folks stay in their homes wasn't enough. And you recreated just this past May, and I hope that everybody here has their own copy and they've highlighted and they have some thoughts about it. We created just this past May our housing supply action plan, and I'd like to say it wasn't a strategic plan. It wasn't a plan to talk about the focus group that would have a focus group as we do so well here in DC. It was intentionally an action plan. And it came with three goals. One was to message that for this administration, affordable housing, dealing with housing affordability through increasing supply, was a very important goal, and one that was core to this administration's values. We also messaged to our friends on the Hill the resources that we needed, well documented in the president's 2023 budget. But we also said, we administratively, all of us, the entire federal family, all of us that are inside of the housing ecosystem, there is something that we can do administratively to just move this agenda along. And so I've been working very closely with all of my peers across the agencies, Treasury, USDA, VA, transportation, on a number of things that we need to do to help folks like you all move the housing agenda. And I'll just mention a couple of those. I'll start one thing that I'm very proud of working with Deputy Secretary Adrianne at Treasury, which is to create a better and streamlined path for us to use state and local funds from the American Rescue Plan administered by Treasury in order to fill some of the housing gap financing for those of you who are developing homes in Connecticut. This was a big deal, and we worked very closely with Treasury. We heard from builders, and we heard from developers, and we heard from nonprofits, and we heard from states and cities some of the barriers that our rules played in using those funds. And so we addressed those. And I'm hoping that many of you in Connecticut are being able to benefit from that additional supply of capital funding in order to help us with some of the supply issues we had. HUD also reinstated its Fellow Financing Banks risk sharing program, which HFAs across the country. And I'm proud to say that we've been able to create $1.6 billion that will create and preserve more than 9,000 rental homes across the country. We are also proud that we worked with our friends at Treasury to finalize the income averaging rule. I know I was waiting for that rule for some time as well. I know some of you probably were, so that we can expand the use of the LIHTC program and again, build more affordable homes for individuals. Look, I don't have to tell you all that housing truly is infrastructure. And we have been working very closely with our partners over Department of Transportation to really braid together two systems that we know are critical and hitting Americans in our pocketbooks, and that is our housing costs and our transportation costs. And so one of the things that we did is we aligned our notice of funding opportunities to help provide technical assistance in a program that's called Thriving Communities. And I believe that the deadline for that particular notice of funding of opportunities is going to be coming upon us very soon. So if you are in the space of providing technical assistance, particularly trying to braid these two systems together, I encourage you to go to HUD's website. I encourage you to go to Transportation's website and certainly respond to the funds that we have out there. One of the things that HUD also did was we prioritized owner occupants and our mission-driven entities so that on the resale of some of HUD's HUD-owned properties, our real estate properties. And we did that because we wanted to make sure that these homes were going to be used and contributing to the homeownership of supply that we had. We know that there are hard barriers out there right now. We know that there's a supply issue both in rental and homeownership. And so while the numbers were small, I think what it has done is create a path forward for HUD to be very thoughtful about how we repurpose these homes when they unfortunately come into our possession, how we repurpose these homes to make sure that they are owner occupied and be given to mission-driven organizations. We are also partnering to work with many local and state partners with our choice programs. You know, choice has had a very strong impact in helping to have strong community redevelopment across the country. And the Secretary and I and others fanned out just some weeks ago to provide some very fortunate cities with funds so that they can really invest in communities across the country. We've also partnered with our friends at FCC and with the Affordable Connectivity Program. And one of the things I'd like each one of you to do is where you and moderate income families who do qualify for the Affordable Connectivity Program, I really encourage you to ask individuals to sign up. This is an extraordinary opportunity. I don't have to share with you all at all the importance that good quality access to the internet played, not just during the pandemic, but really shifting the way that we commune like we are right now. And I share the story that during the pandemic, even prior to the pandemic, I read to a fourth grade class here in Washington, D.C., and did that actually during the pandemic as well. And through reading to these young folks virtually, I could actually see the divide in real time. Like those young kids who had strong internet capacity, had their cameras on, they were leaning in, they were focused. but I could see the students who were not able to participate. And I like, you know, and I was reading a storybook. Imagine if these were students who were trying to learn math, who were trying to hone up their reading skills, trying to learn more in their science class. So it is critical, and it's a moral imperative, quite frankly, that we do everything we can to get as many families have access to the Affordable Connectivity Program. It is a wonderful opportunity, and really encourage each one of you to try to help me, the secretary, and others to make sure, and our FCC partners, to make sure that we are signing families up for this low to no cost access to the internet. You know, one of the things that we're also proud that we're doing is we're leveraging the president's many successes. We talked about the bipartisan infrastructure. We also had our Inflation Reduction Act. Embedded inside of that Inflation Reduction Act is $1 billion for help us to green and also preserve our PBRA, our project-based rental assistance units across the country. It is certainly not as much money we had hoped as housers to receive. And you know, that fight's not done yet, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. And I know that it will benefit units and families who live in them for years to come. You know, I heard our executive director talk a little bit about some of the issues on the demand side. And we know that the 70,000 vouchers that we were able to deploy as part of the American Rescue Plan was not enough to make sure that our homeless neighbors were able to be, as many as our homeless neighbors, to be housed across the country. But we're not done fighting for more. The secretary just a couple of weeks ago announced an additional 20,000 vouchers in the Housing Choice Voucher Program that has been deployed and will also be used to help low and moderate income individuals, including our homeless neighbors, especially our homeless neighbors, to be able to find a home. You know, and this is a small drop in the bucket. You know, our president fought for and recommended 200,000 vouchers during his last budget, and we will continue to advocate and fight for more rental assistance for individuals across the country. We know that housing costs are going up. We know what it feels like in the rental market. We know who these who's been impacted the hardest. We know it's people of color. We know it's homeless individuals. We know it's people with disabilities. We know it's our seniors on fixed incomes. We know it's individuals in rural counties. And we want to do more each and every day. And so while those 20,000 vouchers we're very proud of it, and we're deploying them right now, we want to make sure that working with each one of you in the state of Connecticut who care about these issues, that we are making sure that we're saying that we do need more to help Americans across the country. And that is why I'm here. And I'll end on this note. You know, like I said at the beginning, it takes a team at every level of government for us to be able to move the housing agenda. And I could not be more proud of the work that you all are doing in Connecticut. I could not be more proud of this particular conference's work that you are doing to just help individuals. I look forward to being up in Connecticut soon to see that work in action. And thank you all for gathering us today. And thank you for making sure HUD was part of this program. You all stay well, fight hard, and lean in with HUD when you need to. Take care.
Thank you so much, Deputy Secretary Todman. We're grateful for you joining us this morning and for all your words and all of the work that you've been doing across the country to help ensure stability. I have the honor of introducing our next speaker, but first I'll introduce myself. I am Danielle Hughley with the Partnership for Strong Communities, and I am our Advocacy and Education Manager. And I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, which is Senator Chris Murphy, who is the Junior United States Senator for Connecticut, and has dedicated his career to public service as an advocate for Connecticut families. Senator Murphy has been a strong voice in the Senate fighting for job creation, affordable health care, education, sensible gun laws, and forward-looking foreign policy. And we are very grateful to have remarks from him today as well. So I'll turn it over to Senator Murphy.
Hello to all my friends of the Partnership for Strong Communities. This is Chris Murphy, U.S. Senator from Connecticut. Listen, so grateful to be able to join you. You've got a pretty impressive lineup for this meeting. But listen, everywhere you go in Connecticut right now, the topic of affordable housing is on the tip of everyone's tongue. We are not going to survive as a state unless we build more affordable housing. And we have to employ an all of the above strategy. We need to reform local zoning laws to allow for more accessory dwelling units, to allow for more affordable units to be built easier with less red tape. We need to put more public dollars into affordable housing. We need to not be shy about commanding the government to spend more of its resources helping people get into homes that they can afford. We need to be aggressive in using tax credits to partner with private industry who wants to build housing. All of the above is necessary because we have a crisis in this country and in Connecticut specifically. People can't afford to live in our state because we're not building enough starter housing, affordable housing at a rate necessary to keep up with job growth. So I'm ready to be a partner with you in any way, shape, or form. We had a big missed opportunity this year. We had, as part of the President's Build Back Better agenda, an opportunity to build 1 million new affordable housing units all across this country. Ultimately, that got shaved off of the proposal, but we're going to come back and try to argue this case over and over and over again. Connecticut's a leader, no doubt, when it comes to our understanding of the problem, but we have work to do to make sure that we're actually putting in place policies that back up our diagnosis with actual treatment. So thanks for being such great friends of mine and of my office. Look forward to working with you.
Great. Thank you so much to Senator Murphy and his team for providing those remarks this morning. As Deputy Secretary Todman said as well, it takes a village, and it's not something we can do without our partners at not only in the state, but also at the federal level as well. So next, I want to move us on to our next speaker. I will be introducing Commissioner Mosquera Bruno to you all. For many of you, she doesn't need an introduction, as she has been a member of the affordable housing development community in Connecticut for many years. Prior to her appointment by Governor Ned Lamont, Seila was the president and chief executive officer of the Mutual Housing Association of South Central Connecticut, Incorporated, or NeighborWorks New Horizons. Since joining NeighborWorks New Horizons in 1994, Seila served in many different capacities and became the executive director in 2003. Under her leadership, the organization expanded operations beyond New Haven County to New London and Fairfield counties, managed 38 employees and $100 million in assets. During her tenure at the Department of Housing, Commissioner Mosquera Bruno has overseen a host of affordable housing programs, as well as a consistent effort to streamline the development process. The commissioner has helped guide tens of millions in new federal COVID resources aimed at preventing homelessness and assisting those experiencing homelessness to exit quickly to permanent housing. Seila has a master's degree in urban studies from Southern Connecticut State University, a bachelor's in business administration from Charter Oak College, and completed the Achieving Excellency in Community Development 18-month fellowship program at Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government. Seila has a vast and extensive experience in advocating for affordable housing on a state and national level, and has participated in many organizations to help strengthen communities. Seila was a board member of the National NeighborWorks Association and co-chair of the NWA National Real Estate Development Advisory Council. And with that, we welcome you, Commissioner, and I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, and thank you, Danielle, for that introduction. It is a pleasure to participate in the 2022 Connecticut's Affordable Housing Conference, Building Stability. Thank you, Kiley, and the Partnership for Strong Communities for hosting this conference for the third time since 2020. As you all know, this past year has been challenging for all of us, and even more challenging for many of our Connecticut families and our most vulnerable residents. During these 3 days, you will have the opportunity to listen to programs, to share experiences, and perhaps to grasp some new ideas or create new ones. For me, a conference provides the opportunity to compare notes with other colleagues, to learn new approaches, and to continue creating a network that supports our efforts to create and preserve affordable housing options. We all are aware of the need for more affordable homes, rental, or homeownership. we have a big task in front of us. I just read a report from Urban Land Institute citing 3 top issues for real estate in 2023: rising interest rates, labor shortages, and housing affordability. These issues are not new to us. For decades, we have faced lack of housing affordability. During the pandemic, labor shortages increased, and for the past few months, interest rates have more than doubled. With these challenges in front of us, we need to explore some other avenues that would allow to control costs, expedite processes, and share expertise. We, DOH, the Department of Housing, and CHAFA cannot do this alone. We need you. Over the next few days, your job is to learn as much as you can, share as much as you can, rethink as much as you can, and commit as much as you can. In closing, I want to thank my staff at the Department of Housing and at the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority. Their dedication and commitment to our work has been exemplary. When you see them, please let them know your appreciation. Again, thank you for attending this conference. I look forward to seeing, hopefully, a lot of you at the networking reception on Tuesday. And I want to leave you with a short video highlighting some of our major accomplishments over the last 3 years.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, and
Thank you, Danielle.
appreciate the video as well. It's great to see some of those developments and see the pictures, the before and afters as well. All righty, so thank you so much. We've heard from some really wonderful folks this morning. We have one last speaker lined up this morning before we open for a Q&A portion. And that last individual is Diane Yentel. So we are so excited to introduce our keynote this morning. Diane Yentel Diane is president and CEO of the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, a membership organization dedicated to achieving racially and socially equitable public policy that ensures people with the lowest incomes have quality homes that are accessible and affordable in communities of their choice. With over 25 years of experience working on affordable housing, Diane is a leading national expert on housing insecurity and homelessness. Under her leadership, NLIHC has deepened, broadened, and strengthened the movement for housing justice, leading major national campaigns to achieve historic federal protections and investments for low-income renters and people experiencing homelessness during the pandemic. In her role, Diane works closely with members of Congress, the White House, numerous federal agencies, and partners and allies throughout the country. Diane is frequently called upon to testify before Congress and to provide commentaries to major media outlets. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Diane, and we're happy to have you. So I'll pass it over to you.
Hi, thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. It's good to be back, so to speak, in Connecticut. I always enjoy joining this conference to talk about the challenges and the opportunities that we have ahead, and also the success that we've enjoyed and achieved together locally in Connecticut and throughout the country as well. We certainly have our work cut out for us, and we do have some challenging years ahead. And certainly these last few years have been both tremendously difficult, grueling, really, and they have been years for us to collectively achieve greater housing resources and protections than any in our lifetimes. So we will keep the momentum going. You know, these last few years, if they've shown us many things, and if they've shown us anything, they have shown us, one, how quickly and effectively the country can implement emergency protections and resources to keep renters and people experiencing homelessness safe, healthy, and housed. And the years have shown us, as housing advocates, organizers, providers, tenant leaders, impacted people, just how deep and broad we have made our movement for housing justice and how powerful and effective we can be when we work together. Because as difficult as these last few years have been, we rose to the challenge and we achieved unprecedented resources and protections for renters and unhoused people. So back in August of 2020, you know, the best available data made clear that up to 12 million households were at risk of losing their homes if the government didn't act. And these were many of the same households who had struggled to pay the rent before the pandemic, but now had lost jobs, lost hours at work, lost wages, and they had increased healthcare, childcare, internet, other costs. So by August of 2020, that small patchwork of pandemic protections and resources had expired, and renters were standing at the edge of a cliff. Advocates, all of us, sounded the alarm, and federal, state, and local governments took heed, providing historic resources and protections to keep tenants housed. Together, we fought for and kept in place a national moratorium on evictions for non-payment of rent. This was historic, unprecedented. In the history of our country, there has never been something like such a broad protection to keep renters housed. And against all odds, and despite some very powerful and well-funded opponents, we kept that moratorium in place for almost a year. Together, we also achieved $46.5 billion in rental assistance, an unprecedented level of support for renters. For perspective, that's more than 46 times what the federal government provided to renters during the Great Recession. It's the largest single allocation of resources exclusively for renters in history. So once we achieved these historic resources, we worked together with the White House, with the Department of Treasury, the Department of HUD, state and local partners, program administrators, impacted people, to together build a new national infrastructure to get these vital resources to the tenants most in need to keep them stably housed. And emergency rental assistance got off to a painfully slow start. We know that, right? We lived and breathed it. It was caught between two administrations, and it's slow work to build, staff, and administer major new programs during a global pandemic. It takes time to design effective programs that center and prioritize the lowest income and the most marginalized people. So at NLIHC, we worked hard to ensure that these resources reached the tenants most in need. We tracked and analyzed over 500 emergency rental assistance programs throughout the country. We researched ERA implementation. We tracked, measured, amplified best practices. We worked very closely with the White House to inform and improve guidance and oversight. We created and shared tools to improve ERA programs, to expedite assistance to renters in need, and to stop evictions. And in Connecticut, you worked hard to get your program up and running and effectively getting these resources to the tenants who needed it most. Connecticut was a great example of a program that started out with some challenges, learned from those challenges, was willing to make needed corrections and turn that ship so that it became a very effective program, and virtually all of the emergency rental assistance in Connecticut has now been spent. Nationally, over 7 million emergency rental assistance payments have been made. And the data make clear that our collective efforts to ensure that these funds reach the lowest income and the most marginalized people worked, right? Those households that have received assistance are predominantly very low and extremely low income, and they are disproportionately people of color, the very people who are most at risk of losing their homes, if not for those emergency resources getting to them. So this kind of successful alignment of resources to those with the greatest and the clearest needs, it doesn't happen by chance, and certainly not when working under such time pressure during a global pandemic. It happens only with deliberate and purposeful program design and outreach, as NLIHC, our partners, and the whole Biden-Harris administration encouraged, enabled, and empowered for program administrators. At the same time that we were working to get ERA out, we were working with many of our state and local partners throughout the country to get state and local governments to do more to protect renters. In Connecticut, you passed Right to Counsel and launched it early this year to rebalance some of the power that tilts so heavily in favor of landlords at the expense of low-income renters. Other communities across the country similarly implemented Right to Counsel, just cause eviction, expunging eviction records, and other protections for tenants. Altogether, our partners and allies throughout the country advocated successfully for state and local governments to enact or implement 150 new tenant protections in 2021 alone. So all of this taken together, this successful advocacy and action, this is what kept millions of families stably housed during the pandemic. But now, of course, our work is certainly not over. Many new challenges await. Those same renters that struggled to keep a roof over their heads before and during the pandemic continue to struggle today, and even more so as costs and rents increase around the country. And while emergency rental assistance and eviction moratoriums were an essential resource, they were only ever a temporary patch to the gaping holes in our social safety net. They do nothing to address the deep structural flaws in our country's housing system. So now in those communities where renter protections have expired or emergency rental assistance is depleted, including many in Connecticut, eviction filings are again reaching, and in some places surpassing pre-pandemic levels. So these same long-standing pre-pandemic housing inequities will persist unless and until policymakers at all levels enact robust tenant protections and invest in the long-term solutions needed to make homes affordable to the lowest income people. So last year at the National Income Housing Coalition, we also launched a major new campaign, the Housed Campaign for Universal, Stable, affordable homes. And the Housed campaign works in parallel to our ever expanding Opportunity Starts at Home campaign. Opportunity Starts at Home campaign mobilizes the healthcare, anti-poverty, anti-hunger, civil rights, education, and other sectors. The Housed campaign mobilizes the housing field, impacted people, organizers, local, state, national advocates, providers. Together, we worked to ensure that investments in housing the lowest income people were included in the Build Back Better Act. Excuse me. Our collective advocacy helped get Build Back Better passed through the House with $150 billion in transformative housing investments. Taken together, it would have been the single largest investment in quality, affordable, accessible homes for the country's lowest income people in history. As a movement, as a country, we have never been so close to investments like these that would transform our collective efforts to achieve housing justice. And it was right within our reach, but for one Democrat standing in the way. So these essential investments ultimately weren't included in the final reconciliation bill that was signed by the president. But our advocacy made a difference. There is no doubt about it. We are that much closer to the finish line the next time we create a window of opportunity, because together we have moved the Democratic Party's stance on affordable housing to one that is much more ambitious, more willing to call for and fund solutions on the scale necessary, more focused on solutions that are deeply targeted to the lowest income people. And we have built Republican support for many of our solutions, which, even if not always evident in Congress, is clear from the bipartisan polls that we and others have done of voters throughout the country. And we have a president and a HUD secretary who, for the first time ever, frame housing as a human right and have committed to universal housing vouchers. So we are closer than ever before, and we need to keep going. Our progress was made clear again by some of the tremendous wins on housing ballots and initiatives in last week's election. So what's ahead, based on those elections, in some ways is still a little unclear. We're all waiting for all votes throughout the country to be counted. But one thing we know for sure in terms of what's ahead is we have 2 more years of the Biden-Harris administration that is eager to do more on housing. This week alone, I will be attending 2 meetings at the White House around affordable housing issues. So we have big opportunities to move things that can be done administratively. But as we all know, what we most need are resources, and only Congress can provide that. So it looks very likely that we'll be moving into a divided government. The House, control of the House is still too close to call, but it looks likely that the Republicans will have the majority there. The Senate and of course the White House will remain in Democratic control. So this could mean some opportunities for us to advance our housing agenda in the lame duck session, and continued work on our bipartisan housing bills in the new Congress. But we will also need to do more defensive work in the next Congress to protect against harmful policies like work requirements or time limits being added to housing investments. And we'll have to work against the certainty that House Republicans will work to cut back federal spending, including on housing programs. So we have our work cut out for us. And some of the challenges are daunting. Certainly the need is tremendous. But these challenges only strengthen my resolve to keep fighting. I have long said in conference after conference and speech after speech for years now that the only thing we ever lacked to end homelessness and housing poverty in our country is political will. And the pandemic proved it, right? When our movement for housing justice saw the danger that the pandemic posed, we aligned with a singular focus to protect people who are homeless and struggling renters, to save lives and keep people stably housed. And we did. And when government at all levels recognized the emergency and the need, it acted and funded solutions on a scale unlike any in our lifetimes. Together, in just 2 years, we achieved what we once would have considered unthinkable, impossible. So now, on those days when our goals feel impossible, when the difficulties of the work and the challenges seem insurmountable, on those days when we feel like we can't or we won't, we should remember that we did. We achieved the unimaginable. We did the impossible. And together we can and we will do it again. So we will build on the momentum. We will keep struggling and fighting until we end homelessness and housing poverty, until we achieve housing justice once and for all. So I want to thank you all for your work day in and day out to keep people in Connecticut safely and stably housed. Thank you for believing and for leading. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I look forward to any questions you might have. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Diane. That was really helpful and chock full of useful information, as you always are. And I know with the recent election, folks are really eager to hear about, as you noted, some of the things that are happening at the federal level and what you think is coming next. Just wanted to remind folks there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you have specific questions that you'd like to ask Diane, please put those in there. I've got a couple that I'm going to get to around tenant protections, but I wanted to start out first by going back to some of your, you touched upon the shift in Congress and sort of the political winds and how that may affect the conversation about housing policy and housing investments. One of the things you noted is that House Republicans may look to roll back some of the investments and some of the progress, frankly, that we were able to make, as you noted, during COVID. The question I have around that is, where housing insecurity is affecting lots of people across pretty much every congressional district in the country, I know that folks, regardless of party, leaders regardless of party, are hearing from folks in their district about housing insecurity. Is there a way to capitalize on that knowledge, on that increased awareness of housing insecurity, and particularly with folks who might not otherwise be supportive of housing investments and housing policy changes? In other words, where this has become more of a universal bipartisan issue, do you see any inroads there and potential for conversation and movement in a way, perhaps with Republicans, that you haven't in the past?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, there has definitely been a shift that we have seen in recent years of Republicans increasingly acknowledging the housing crisis that exists in their communities. Because as you say, it's reached such a level, and it's with any kind of social issue, right? When things start to impact the middle class is often also when more politicians start to pay attention. And that's certainly true for housing costs as well. So there absolutely, there are very few Republicans, I would say at this point, who would deny that there's a housing crisis and that some solutions are needed. So there's an opportunity and a threat there, because the opportunity is that what we have also seen is that as Republicans talk about the housing crisis and recognize the need for action, they often, and I'm talking mostly about the Republicans that are on the key housing committees, they often mostly attribute it only to state or local zoning laws, which of course that is a piece of the puzzle. State and local restrictive zoning is absolutely contributing to the housing crisis that we are facing and has to be addressed at the state and local level. But it's also a way to kind of shirk responsibility and say that this is a state and local issue and not acknowledge the federal role that needs to be played in order to solve the housing crisis for everyone. So we do have kind of a foot in the door there, and we do have an opportunity to get some of the federal levers that can be pulled to address local zoning. We can make some progress there. We have to continue really making the case and educating all members of Congress that even if we address all local zoning issues, we need major federal investments to make homes affordable, especially for the lowest income people, for extremely low income people for whom the market can't work on its own without subsidies. So, but there too, I would say we have made some progress. We do have some Republican support for things like expanding the low income housing tax credit program and improving it so that it's more possible to use those credits to make homes affordable to extremely low income people. And we have some, not as much as we need, but we do have some Republican support for expanding housing choice vouchers and for making emergency rental assistance a permanent program, which are two of our top priorities as well. So we're making inroads. There are opportunities to push forward some bipartisan solutions in the next Congress.
Yeah, thank you. You answered one of my follow-up questions to that, which is going to be where you saw some specific, what are some specific potential inroads or policies that may come out of that awareness. You talked about, and we know that in order to really both solve homelessness and make big headway on housing insecurity, that there has to be significant federal investment, that states can't do that on their own, and particularly with vouchers, expanding that program, I think will be critical to moving the needle on both of those issues. But what states should be doing in the meantime? Or do you have recommendations for either places where states can be putting in bigger investments or more investments, or other policies or programs that you think states can be really helpful in implementing to help continue to move the needle on those two issues aside from federal investment?
Yeah, well, I would say the federal, actually, there's still a significant amount of federal investments that haven't been spent in some states and localities from the American Rescue Plan. And I'm talking mainly about the state and local fiscal relief fund dollars, $350 billion pot of money that went from the federal government to states and some localities with a very wide range of uses. And some communities, including Connecticut, I don't actually have that number in front of me, I'm sure you do, but some communities have put some of those resources for affordable housing or homelessness, addressing homelessness. We've been tracking plans across the country, and at last count, it's about $16 billion in total that states and localities have set aside for affordable housing, which is significant. But more of that can be used for this purpose. And in a lot of states, that money has not yet been spent. And in some states, it hasn't even been obligated or planned for. So that's a place to look for. Can more state and local fiscal relief fund dollars be used for affordable housing needs? The other place is to look at the emergency housing vouchers that are in many communities. Lots of good work in getting those out, some difficulty in getting people to be able to actually lease up apartments with those for a lot of other reasons, but encourage everybody to do as much as we can to get those vouchers utilized, not only because there's such need right now, but also because we have to be successful with this program to be able to make the case for more. And then the last piece is the $5 billion in home funds that were allocated through the American Rescue Plan that can be used for communities to purchase hotels or motels or other sort of unusual properties to turn them into permanent supportive housing. There's a lot more that can be done there in many communities with those funds. And then beyond that, I would say for like we saw on last week's ballot, there are several states that were able to pass new affordable housing bond measures to increase state and local resources for more affordable housing while we wait for the federal, even that is good news. And we know that it's not enough. We still need the federal government. So I would say keep doing what you're doing in using existing resources. Look for if there's places for more of those resources to be used for this purpose, and then keep fighting with us for the federal government to actually do what it needs to for us to solve this problem at the local level.
Yeah, thank you. I had a question, and there's another question on the screen related to tenant protections, and you touched on this in your remarks. During the pandemic, we saw a lot of innovative solutions around protecting tenants, both from eviction, as well as rental increases, and helping to buoy folks, especially those who lost income. One of the challenges we have here in Connecticut is a significantly older housing stock. A lot of our rental housing is extremely old, and so health and safety issues within that housing continues to be a major challenge here. So kind of in the broad context of tenant protections, where are you seeing any potential for advancement at the federal level of policies, programs, or investments around protecting tenants, both from eviction as well as I noted, health and safety issues? Perhaps those are landlord incentives, perhaps there are other types of legal changes, but curious to hear more specifics on whether you see some potential movement and growth in that area.
So at the federal level, I'd say it's quite difficult to get legislation moving forward on broad tenant protections, because most policymakers believe, and it is the case in most communities, that landlord-tenant relationships are a local issue and should be local law. Now, that kind of patchwork solution creates tremendous challenges for the lowest income people, the most marginalized people, the most vulnerable people. So we do need federal protections, but it's a steep hill to climb, I would say. A place where we have had some progress and some traction, even previously some bipartisan support, is on potential federal source of income protections against source of income discrimination. That's one place. There have been more federal policymakers talking about the need for right to counsel, the need to expunge eviction records, then a way to look at how tenant rent payments can be used for credit histories to give them more opportunities in that way. I think our greatest chance of getting tenant protections enacted in the short term is to look at what can be done administratively. So President Biden, during his campaign, he committed to implementing a tenant bill of rights, and his team have been doing they've been having conversations with stakeholders. There's actually a meeting at the White House today that I'm going to with 10 tenant leaders from NLHC's board and our partners to talk about tenant protections. And they're looking at how the leases can be strengthened. They're looking at health and safety issues, especially as it relates to subsidized housing. They're looking at more broadly safe and stable, affordable housing, and they're looking at civil and fair housing rights and where within those categories the administration can do more. So we have a lot of ideas that we're sharing with them. I would encourage you to as well if you have it, because they are definitely looking very deeply at tenant protections right now to see what is within their authority to make change. I think we'll see some good things coming from them. One of the things that we, somewhat related to the health and safety issue, that we have been really pushing for is for the federal government to hold corporate landlords, those that have been proven to have used some really egregious predatory behaviors for tenants in their properties, to be held accountable. Many of these corporate landlords are actually financed through the federal government, through FHFA loans. And that has to stop. The federal government has a very clear lever there to use and to apply some really steep consequences for that kind of behavior among predatory landlords. And just doing that alone, we could see some real benefits for some of the lowest income people in these properties.
time for maybe two more questions. We have a bucket of kind of questions in the justice impacted population area. So I'm going to try to kind of mush them together a little bit. But we know in Connecticut, as in many places across the country, that those with different interactions with the criminal justice system have more challenges obtaining housing. And here in Connecticut, we know that the overlap with folks experiencing homelessness and those with who are justice impacted is significant, as much as 40%, give or take, based on our research. So that continues to be a major hurdle for housing folks, even where subsidies or other things are available. I'm curious to know whether you have any thoughts on, again, whether there's federal discussion around federal policies in that space and any changes there, or whether that continues to be sort of a challenging area. And then perhaps maybe any other innovative programs or practices you've heard from other states in terms of helping that particular population find housing stability.
Yeah, as is probably obvious, since 2020 and the murder of George Floyd and the national reckoning that created, there have been a lot of conversations in Congress and progress towards some much broader criminal legal system reform. They have gotten stuck often at different points related primarily to politics, but included in that and not talked about often are some improvements for affordable housing for people who have been involved in the criminal legal system. So I don't know if we'll see those provisions move forward. Things like right now, public housing agencies, for example, have a lot of leeway in how they look at criminal records and how far back they look. So there would be some requirements here about only looking back for a much shorter period of time. There are some PHAs, public housing agencies, that look back a decade or longer for anything on a person's record, and that can keep them from getting into the affordable housing that they need. So there are some changes that could be made that would have a shorter look back period. That's something too that even in the absence of congressional action that the administration has really been taking seriously and looking at very closely to see what more they can do, some further guidance to public housing authorities, further encouraging them not to look back so far, to find other ways to work with landlords to incentivize them to accept tenants that have been involved in the criminal legal system, in the same way that offering incentives to landlords to serve people experiencing homelessness has worked really effectively. That's something that could also be used in this space and has in some areas. So kind of pilot programs that are popping up that I'd say the administration and Congress are looking to as ways to implement some larger change. But in the short term, it's a place where I would see the administration doing more than Congress can.
Thanks for that. All right, I'm going to close us out with one final question before we move to our next session. You mentioned some defensive work that we're going to have to potentially do in order to prevent rollback of existing housing investment. Anything specifically that we and you all we should be on the lookout for, that you are on the lookout for? And what can we do from our position here in Connecticut to help with those federal policy efforts, both defensively and offensively?
Yeah, well, the first threat I would say is that Republicans have made very clear that if they take the majority in the House, they intend to spend a lot of their time and power doing investigations of the administration and of spending through the American Rescue Plan. So some of that'll be, that some of the committees plan to focus on impeachment of maybe the president or the DHS secretary or others. Some of them will be looking into investigations about priorities and policies on the southern border. But there will be some investigations of American Rescue Plan spending. And there have been some false allegations from some in Congress about potential fraud in housing related American Rescue Plan spending. So when it comes to emergency rental assistance, we want to be very clear and certain of the story we have to tell there, including where there have been very, very minimal fraud compared to programs like the PPP program, but be able to tell the story then about how programs tightened their oversight or improved their efforts to ensure programs were working well. We also have to make sure that all the American Rescue Plan and the CARES Act funding has been spent and spent well. So that includes like the CDBG CV money, the ESG CV money, the ESG, the emergency housing vouchers. Anything more that communities can do to really make sure that all that money, or as much of it as possible, gets spent is going to help in those conversations. And then more broadly, the Republicans have also said that they intend to cut back federal spending wherever possible, whether using debt ceiling fights or appropriations fights to do it. So we need to just keep doing what we've always done, which is tell the story about why these programs are so essential and what they do in our communities. So you all know how to do that very well. And I would say just keep doing it and know that your senators and your members of Congress may need to hear from you more than ever about why these day-to-day programs that haven't been under threat for some time work, and why not only do we need to maintain them, we actually need to increase them.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. And I think, as we all know, we have a really supportive and great delegation here in Connecticut that we're sending back to Congress. But I think still sharing with them stories, experiences, new facts and information is helpful for them in terms of bolstering the case amongst their colleagues for these programs.
Absolutely. They're the ones that we depend on to convince colleagues to do the right thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for joining us today. We really appreciate having you every year and giving us this update. It's really valuable, and we appreciate your time as always. I see some virtual clapping of hands in the background. Our next session starts at 10:30. So for those of you who are joining us for that, we look forward to seeing you. And thanks again to Diane. Thanks for all of you for joining us for this opening session. I hope you're able to find lots of great information and sessions throughout the next 3 days as the conference progresses. Thanks again, everyone. Look forward to seeing you throughout the conference.